Welcome to the Rally Points podcast for the love and fun of tennis.
Bud Schultz, one of England's greatest, is sharing some thoughts and stories with us today.
For Bass River logo.
Oh, there you go. All right, so Bud Schultz, thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm
Really cool.
Honored to be asked.
It's it's time to speak with the highest ranked New England player, right? 40 in the world.
Not the highest, Tim Mayotte.
Mayotte was. Oh, that's right.
Mayotte,
Yeah.
And some people don't consider Greenwich part of New England. But then you got to look at James Blake.
Yes, of course.
As well.
Yeah. That's.
But in the scheme of
You're
things,
out
that's
there,
not bad.
Right.
Oh,
That's not
come
bad.
on.
Yeah. 39, right? 39.
The highest was 39 for a couple weeks.
There you go.
Then I
Take
went back
it.
to 40.
Yeah. We'll take it. Yeah. And Eric Buderak, right? He was. How high did he get in doubles? Because
He was
also
top
someone
20.
who's worth to be
He was
mentioned.
top 20.
Yeah.
Now he's not a born and bred New Englander.
Yeah.
Lived here for quite a while, but he's a Minnesota kid.
Yeah.
And went to Gustavus Adolphus out in St. Peter, Minnesota.
The two of you were you just inducted
Into the Intercollegiate Tennis Hall of Fame. Yeah, and there's sort of a funny story there because they hold the Winter Nationals at Gustavus Adolphus,
Yep.
and one thing led to another. And Eric got a phone call, probably 8 or 9 months ago, saying, no one from Division III tennis has ever done what you've done, which is, top 20 in the world in doubles, finals of the Australian Open in doubles. And as they were asking him if he would be available and we'd like to induct you into the Intercollegiate Tennis Hall of Fame, his response was, well, arguably, that's not the case. And Eric and I go back to when he was 13 years old, when he and his father were coming to Longwood Cricket Club for the National Father-Son Championships. And so I've known him, since he was a young teenager. And he said, well, arguably, that's not the case. You should look at this guy, Bud Schultz, who went to Bates College, before you commit to me.
Yeah.
So the beauty of the whole scenario was that they then gave me a call, and on the call, I had this inkling. It just had Eric's fingerprints all over it, and I said, "Yeah." And so I asked the person, did Eric Buderak have anything to do with this? And her response was, "I'm not at liberty to say."
Okay, well, there you go.
So as soon as they came back and said, it's a definite and you're available, and blah blah blah. I said, now can you tell me whether Eric had? And she said, yes. And she relayed that story to me, that he didn't want to commit until they had talked to me. And so Eric and I have crossed paths in so many different ways.
Yes.
And he and I still talk like every couple months.
Yeah, he seems like a nice guy.
And we've become, to some degree, a touchstone for each other. He's now the assistant tournament director at the U.S. Open.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about everything from the U.S. Open to the state of today's game to he's now got 3 kids. I raised 3 kids, to raising kids and this, that, and the other thing. So to be inducted with him was absolutely wonderful. It was really good weekekend.
Now,
Nice show of respect by him, too.
Yeah.
Handled it the way he did. Very respectful.
So true to form on his part.
Seems
for
like he's that
anyone
guy.
that knows him, he's just one of the best. Straight shooter and always does the right thing.
Right.
Always does the right thing.
Yeah, a few times I interacted with him in some of the Longwood events or whatever. He was super nice. Just a great guy. So, Bates College, you weren't recruited for tennis, were they?
No. There's a sort of a funny story behind that. I was dating in high school, I was dating this young lady whose father was the basketball coach at Wesleyan University, another NESCAC school.
Yeah.
And I had gotten it into my, 18-year-old head that I wasn't going to go to college. Both my parents are highly educated, and much to their dismay, I just had decided I wasn't going to go. I wanted to get on and work and maybe play a little tennis and just I've never particularly liked school.
Yeah, hey, you're not alone.
So my girlfriend's father pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you're a really good athlete. You're a really good kid, and if you don't go to college, you're not dating my daughter."
Well, there you go. There you go. He knew what 8-year-old
He
was.
followed that with, "Where did you apply to college?" So when he heard that Bates was on my list of schools that I applied to, he said, "I know I'm good friends with the basketball coach there, and if I call him, would you go? If I call him and say, hey, you should take a flyer on this kid." And I sort of wanted to continue to date his daughter.
Yeah. Smart man.
So I said, okay. And within a week, I had gotten in and had committed to go to Bates College to go play basketball.
Basketball.
Play basketball, yeah.
And then did you
So
walk in?
My girlfriend's father said, "Oh, and by the way, he plays tennis too," because the basketball coach, George Wigton at Bates, who became like a second father to me, and as his daughter said, "Buddy, you needed two fathers." He was also the tennis coach. So there literally, over the course of 4 years, couldn't have been 10 days where I didn't see this man.
Wow.
And I developed a relationship where I walked into his house like it was my own. His kids were like my siblings.
That's a nice setting.
So he was a game changer for me. As you look back and people who had an influence on you and changed the trajectory of your life, he's in the top 3.
That's amazing.
Wonderful. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but wonderful, wonderful man.
Yeah,
it's good to have those characters through your life. Yeah, that's amazing. And now, what you went for it, right? You want to go pro. What made you go for it? When did you do it? Did you finish your 4 years?
So I did.
You did.
And my senior year, I lost in the finals of Division III NCAAs. And back then, it no longer is the case, but back then, if you were either a finalist in Division III or a semifinalist in Division II, you got a bid to Division I. So I got the bid to Division I, showed up at the University of Georgia, didn't know a soul, hadn't played anyone else in the that's not true. Bob Green from Boston University was in, but beyond that, I didn't know anyone. Came out, played the number 3 seed. This guy, Robbie Venter from UCLA, he was number 3 in the country. And, lost a reasonable match to him, 6-4, 6-4. And I quite honestly thought that was, for the most part, other than New England, was really the end of my tennis career. I then finished college, was going to go on to a coaching career up in Maine. I was going to coach basketball and tennis. And I got a phone call from a guy by the name of Stan Mescon, who at the time was the Boston University tennis coach, men's coach. Said, this is like August 21st, that following summer, and said, I just had a graduate assistant position approved. I'm wondering if you'd like to take it. I need to know by the end of the day.
Great.
And I said, Stan, I knew him from, as the BU coach, knew him very, very tangentially. And so the idea that he called me out of the blue, I'm like, why is he taking a flyer on me?
Yeah.
My parents were thrilled that I was going to still be in school.
Yeah.
So I said, there are worse things I could do with a year of my life. So I came to Boston, was basically the men's assistant at BU. The number one player on that team was a guy by the name of Bob Green, who also made it into the top 50 in the world.
Great.
And I was basically his practice partner. Played in some Pro-Am, big Calcutta, and played against this guy, Bill Drake.
Oh, yeah.
Who at the time was coaching Barbara Potter, who was top 10 in the world, and Tim Mayotte, who was coming right out of winning the NCAAs from Stanford University and came out of college top 30 in the world.
Wow.
And he said, hey, I need someone to hit with these two. So I would come in and hit with Barbara. I would come in and hit with Tim. And whenever they called, I was there.
Yeah.
And after about 6 months, they collectively pulled me aside and said, you're good enough to play. You got to get out there. I was, my sort of naive view was, where is there? I really have no idea, how to even begin what turned into incredible adventure.
Yeah.
And 2 years later, I was top 100 in the world.
That's amazing.
So, the twists and turns and, Stan Mescon calling me out of the blue, having me come to Boston, Bill Drake having played him in a tournament and just looking at me like, I've never heard of you. Where did you come from?
Yeah.
And then getting me to hit with his players, like the twists and turns and the people, Stan to this day, I've got, I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for Stan.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for Bill Drake. Again,
it's amazing.
I've identified 6 or 7 people in my life that without them, I'd be up in Maine coaching tennis and basketball, which wouldn't be that bad a thing. But I had quite an adventure otherwise.
And you basically toured the world. You were everywhere. I remember you and I talked at a Lobsters event quite a few years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when you were talking about like different places in the world. You talk about New Zealand and the horses and the wild horses. So you traveled the world everywhere, right? That must have shaped you, changed your shape too, right?
I was lucky enough to have had a very good education behind me.
Yeah.
And I felt like the travel was an opportunity to see in real life the people, places, and things that I had learned about over the course of my education. So, as an example, if I was in Paris, I was going to see Notre Dame. I was going to the Louvre. I was, wherever I was sort of, I wanted to see those things that I had only read about.
Yeah.
And from that standpoint, it was just this incredible luxury to explore the world at such a young age when, so many of the other guys felt burdened by being on the road.
That's a good way to look at it.
So it was just an amazing luxury of life that I was able to experience.
That's a good way to look at it. That's for sure. You have some connections with the touring life. Now we're going to get into that later on. I want to get into the state of tennis today, but how was the touring life back then? And did you see a change over the years? Because it's obviously changing, but was it just as rough, as hard as you hear now, like traveling from time zone to time zone and everything else?
Well, I think one of the things about professional tennis at that level, at the highest level, that certainly Americans don't fully understand is that, tennis is the number 2 sport worldwide.
Exactly.
Right. So if I play, back in the day, if I played the tournament at Longwood Cricket Club, people would know who I am.
Yeah.
But if I played anywhere else in America, I was just another guy. which is what I was. I was just another guy, right? But if I went and played a tournament somewhere in Europe, that was a big deal. And, you could be walking down the street somewhere in Europe and people would recognize you as, oh, that's so-and-so. So it was from that standpoint, you were also traveling from major time zones to major time zones. You might spend 3 weeks over in Europe, but then you go to Asia. Or, after the U.S. Open, for instance, we would go to the West Coast. And then from the West Coast, we would go to Hong Kong. And then from Hong Kong, we'd go to Australia. And then from Australia, we'd go back to Tokyo. And those are significant time zones, right? So as a Major League Baseball player, an NBA player, or, someone in the NBA or, in the NFL, 3 time zones, big schmeal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's right too.
So it took a lot of discipline, a lot of getting used to, a lot of understanding what you needed to perform well, how many days, based on how many time zones you needed to be there ahead of time. But you learned. And if you watched and listened and learned, you had a chance to stick around for a while. Yeah. But I can't tell you how many people... how many guys who, I looked at them and go, they're way more talented than I am, who showed up for a little while, really couldn't handle the lifestyle, couldn't figure out for themselves what they needed to do to be successful. Yeah. Traveling 5 or 6 time zones and being ready to play a tennis match.
Who were you traveling with at that point? Did you have people you were coach you were traveling with? Or?
My coach was Bill Drake. Yeah. He took me in. He was already coaching Tim Mayotte. Then a guy by the name of Bob Green, who was at BU, made it to top 50 in the world, came into the fold. So now he's coaching, a guy who's top 10. I'm around 40. Bob's around 50. And then the final guy in the group was this guy, Glenn Leyendecker, who got to, 70, 80 in the world.
Well, that's a good crew.
It was an unbelievable crew. Glenn went to Yale, Bob went to BU, Tim went to Stanford, I went to Bates, and we all had completed our education.
This is post everyone,
we all had completed our education. We all sort of saw a lot of the world through similar eyes, and inevitably we would be with one or all of us together at tournaments. So, it was jokingly referred to on the tour as Team New England, and especially because we all had the same coach. Yeah. Right.
Way to go, Bill Drake.
And more than once we rode Timmy's coattails for this, that, and the other thing. So I've got a funny story about my first Wimbledon with Timmy.
He's a Wimbledon semifinalist.
Yeah. So at Wimbledon, there are 2 locker rooms, locker room A and locker room B. And locker room A is for the seeds and all the veterans. And locker room B is for guys like me and Bob Green and Glenn Leyendecker. So my first Wimbledon, Timmy goes into locker room A, which is where he was, because I don't know, he was seated like 10th, 11th, 12th or something, and said, hey, is there any extra room in here for, some of my buddies? We're all coached by the same guy. So anyways, he got us into locker room A, and when he told us, I was like, oh, that's awesome. Until the second I walked in, I'm like, oh, this sucks. I don't know a soul in here, right? Because I was neither seated nor a veteran. And so I go to my locker, and to the left of me is Connors, and to the right of me is McEnroe, and to the left of Connors is Vitas Gerulaitis. Wow. And so...
You guys got any extra deodorant?
I know. So I sit down, and I don't know. I really don't know any of them. It rains. I go to play my first match on the first day, and it starts raining. And we come into the locker room, and I'm sitting at my locker, and John comes in and sits down. Jimmy comes in and sits down, and Vitas comes in and says something to Jimmy. And where does the language, where can I take the language on this podcast?
Anywhere you want.
Anywhere you want. Yeah.
So anyways, Jimmy looks past me, like leans forward and says, "John, you're a effing a-hole." And they start arguing, and I'm just sitting there in between these two guys going at it. So the second day, go back out to play my match, starts raining, come back in, sitting at the locker room. Eventually, John and Jimmy are sitting there, and Vitas goes over and says something to John. And John looks over at Jimmy and goes, "You're a effing a-hole," blah, blah, blah. And they start just screaming at each other, right? So the third day, I go out, go to play my match, starts raining again, come back in. I'm sitting there, couple hours later, they start arguing with each other, and I'm just sitting there. I'm like, this is awful. This is just absolutely awful. So Jimmy gets up and walks away, and John looks at me and says, "Who the fuck are you anyways?" And so now, I mean, I see the humor in the whole thing, but John was humorless.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I'm Bud Schultz, and
From locker room
this is
B.
and it's my first Wimbledon." And he goes, "Well, where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I grew up in Meriden, Connecticut. I went to Bates College." And he goes, "No, you didn't."
So funny.
Anyways, then we started chatting because he was absolutely like bewildered that some kid from Bates College who hadn't started playing professional tennis until he was 22 years old could possibly be playing Wimbledon. And anyways, we became, no one was good friends with John, but we became friendly thereafter. Just because he was the best way. Like,
Who the fuck are you?
Yeah, because he just like a lot of people, really couldn't believe my story.
Yeah,
it is a remarkable one. Yeah, gotta love Vitas though.
Vitas, and the beauty is, like, Vitas is sitting there like the Cheshire Cat because he knows exactly. Like, I can get these two going, and he would sit there sort of giggling, watching them because Vitas, true to form, Vitas was the only human being in the entire world that was really good friends with both of them, right? So he could sit there and sort of wind the two of them up and think it's pretty funny.
Yeah,
but
did you
You played both Becker and Edberg when they were younger, right?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah. So I'm playing back then we called it a satellite.
Yeah,
so it was a series of 5 tournaments. Yeah. The first 4 would be sort of the regular season, and then the 5th one would be the playoffs.
Yeah.
And they'd be back to back, and they would be in a very defined specific region. So like they might have a satellite in Texas. And so I was playing this satellite in Germany, and the first tournament, they had a qualifying tournament of 256 for 4 spots.
Wow.
So I get to the qualifying round, and at the time I've got like 10 ATP points. Yeah. So it barely gets me into the qualifying in this thing. I get to the qualifying round, and I got to play this 15-year-old kid. And I'm thinking, there's no way I'm losing to a 15-year-old. Well, it was Becker. I lost to him.
Yeah. Well, he won Wimbledon 2 years later. So
yeah. So the second week of that satellite, it was a 128 draw for 4 spots. I get to the last round. I'm playing a 16-year-old kid from Sweden, and I'm thinking, no way I'm losing to a 16-year-old after I lost to, well, it was Edberg. And then the third week, I lost to Edberg again in the last round of qualifying. In the fourth week, I'm in the last round of qualifying. So I'm playing great. Yeah. I'm thinking, and Becker went on to lose in the finals of the main draw the first week. So I'm like, okay, I guess it wasn't such a bad loss. And Edberg made the semis in the finals of the semis of the first week in the finals. So I'm like, oh, these guys are really good. right?
Yeah.
So the fourth week, I have to play this guy in the last round of qualies, Bobo Zivojinovic, who, lost in the finals of Wimbledon 4 or 5 years later.
Oh, wow.
And he comes up to me before the match and says he already knows he's getting in as a lucky loser because he's the highest seed in the qualies. And everyone knows there are 2 guys that aren't coming. So he knows he's getting in. So he comes up to me and he says, I'll tank if you give me your first round prize money. But he says it. He was from Romania, I think. No,
Serbia.
Maybe
no.
Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
And so he goes, "You'll give me in that accent your first round prize money," and I tank. And it wasn't the smartest answer, but it offended me. Yeah. So I told him where he could put his offer.
Yeah.
And, just show up for the match. So we get to the match, and he's so mad at me because I wasn't as polite as I just said it there. Yeah. I told him to go stick it.
Yeah.
And so in the warm-up, all he tried to do was hit me. And so it was impossible to warm up. And then we get out there, and I realized the entire match, all he's trying to do is hit me.
That's it.
So, he'd hit a drop shot, so I'd come to the net so he could just, take my head off. And I'm like, this is working for me because I'm going to win, So anyways, I qualified, and if I made the quarters, then I would make it into that fifth week, the playoffs. Made the quarters, lost to Edberg the 3rd time in 4 weeks. And then I made the quarters of the playoffs, lost to Becker again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, those guys.
So that was a lot of Becker and Edberg. Yeah. And the funny thing was I came home and Bill Drake is looking at me like, how could you be losing to 15 and 16-year-olds? And I'm like, Bill, you should see these 2 kids. They're really, really good. And he sort of, at the time, no one knows them, right?
Yeah.
And he just sort of rolled his eyes and goes, yeah. Well, as it turns out, they were pretty good.
Had decent careers.
Both. Yeah.
Those guys had some matches, man. That's for sure. They had some.
Yeah, all those guys went after each other.
Yeah.
And so you made the decision to be done with that at some point, right? And then moved on to not after those losses, I hope.
Yeah.
But then you stayed in tennis. Obviously, you're still in tennis. So let's go a little bit into your work career. And was it Longwood right off the bat when you finished?
It was.
Wow.
So
how long did you stay on the tour for?
So I was on tour for the better part of 9 years, 8.5, 9 years.
That's a good.
And my last tournament was Australian Open 1990, I think. And my back seized up in the first round. I came home. That's a long flight with your back seized up. I came home, went to doctors. I had a stress fracture in one of my lumbar vertebrae, and I had stress fractures in my tibias 2 years before. I'm like, this is my body can't handle it anymore. And the job at Longwood Cricket Club opened up. A guy by the name of Benny Sims was the director of tennis there for probably 7 or 8 years, and he called me and he goes, I don't know what's going on with your career, but I'm leaving Longwood and wanted you to know. And once again, Bill Drake sort of jumped into the fray and went to the powers that be at Longwood and said, look, I've been coaching this kid for 9 years now, and he's smart, he's a fast learner. His work ethic is unquestioned. If you're ever going to take a chance on this kid. And they did.
That's amazing.
So I jumped right off the tour again. One of these fateful,
big job to jump
fateful
into,
twists.
Having any type
boy,
of experience with that type of.
Like a lot of times in my life, I had no idea what I didn't know.
Right. That's a massive transition.
Yeah. So I jumped in and sort of figured it out as I went. And once again, was one of the luckiest people in the world.
Yeah. Did you do Longwood and B&T?
So after about 7 years at Longwood, the B&T position opened, and there's a huge crossover of membership between Longwood Cricket Club and the Badminton and Tennis Club. Yeah. So they came to me and asked me if I would be interested. At that point I had a couple kids. Yeah. I had gone and gotten my MBA, and I was ready to take on more. Yeah. And the beauty of it is there's only a month crossover in the fall and a month crossover in the spring, where the B&T closes down, Longwood starts up, and vice versa in the fall. So again, I was lucky enough to be in a position to take that on.
You jumped in the life of a tennis pro, right?
Boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was Longwood? Did they have a big staff like they do now? Because they have a pretty good staff now.
Yeah. Well, I viewed it when I came in as really the tennis programming side of it as being completely untapped. Yeah. So we ramped up everything. Yeah. It was sort of stuck in the era of being an old line traditional club. Yeah. It was going through a transition where they're bringing in a lot of younger members with kids and so on and so forth. So it was ripe as an opportunity to sort of expand everything. By the time I left, I don't know, we probably had 10 pros and it was a big staff.
A guy that doesn't know what the hell he's doing.
Right. He's not burdened by what was, right?
It's like you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And they
loved it,
they were happy to have, some new ideas and
energy and that's so do you still belong to Longwood? Do you still go there a decent amount?
So I don't go there a lot.
Yeah.
But my wife Elaine and I joined after I left. So left Longwood when she and I bought the Cohasset Tennis Club. Yeah. We joined as a family membership, and just being on the South Shore was just too far and too hard to get to. So Elaine kept the membership and I left. Yeah. So she was a single member, and 4 years ago they inducted me as an honorary member. So so I have membership. I'm not quite sure what it allows me to do. But I am duly honored.
Your name is on quite a few plaques there.
Yeah.
And let's move on to one of, I think, the greatest things that you and Krista winning the the father-son.
To this day, I'm emotional about it because it was absolutely the best tennis experience of my life.
That's amazing.
To win a national championship with your son. The funny thing about it was, when he's playing, or back then when in college, he was a world-class doubles player.
Oh yeah.
With the big lefty serve and his quickness and his willingness at the net. So when we played the year that we won, I foolishly thought I could practice for a couple months and show up, and how wrong I was. I played what I thought was very poorly, and Christo just controlled everything.
Yeah. He can do that.
And, it's good tennis. From the quarters on, all the fathers had played some level of professional tennis, and all the sons were or had played Division I level tennis. So it's pretty good tennis.
Yeah. Right.
And Christo really controlled everything. And, the following year, we went back to defend, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to embarrass myself. So I really trained. I played 50% better, and he played about 5% less well, and we had no shot.
Really?
Yeah. And so we lose in the semis, and I'm sort of chuckling after the match, and he's looking at me. It's like, why are you laughing? We just lost. And I explained the equation that I just explained to you. And I said, you know what that makes me? And he's looking at me like I'm an idiot. I go, that makes me irrelevant. And he just looked at me with utter disdain and got up and walked away. It's just like, you're an idiot.
Chris is a player, man. Harvard player. Like, he's a good. I'm glad I saw him on Monday.
You know, after we won, you know, there were a couple hundred people there watching the finals, and you know, there's a very nice award ceremony, and I couldn't get words out.
Yeah.
And Christo's like, I got this, Dad.
Yeah.
I got this, Dad. And one more piece to like the best tennis experience of my life. He just pulled me back and went up and just crushed it, you know, in terms of, you know, just accepting the trophies and so on and so forth. So
yeah, he's
it was
a good
the best tennis experience of my life.
Cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. I mean, would be for most people.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
to win that with your son.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And you obviously been involved so much more there, and you started Tenacity, right? That's another massive project that and it's still going strong. So that's something that's what made you kind of get that going?
You know, really, it starts all the way back with my parents. You know, instilling a sense of, you know, giving back, being thankful for all the opportunities. And certainly tennis to that point had given me so much. Life experience, fun, joy, sorrow. It had given me everything.
You gotta have them all.
And, you know, I truly felt an obligation. You know, I have a responsibility to give back. And a guy by the name of Ned Eames came back to Boston. He was sort of a Boston Worcester kid, came back to Boston with an idea that he wanted to start something. And he and I had known each other. He had played a little bit on the tour. He and I knew each other from there, and because he was a Boston guy, he connected with me around starting something. And it was really the genesis of it, and the brainchild was his. And, you know, I jumped on board to help give it some credibility through my notoriety and through different people that I knew and could engage around Boston. And so that was sort of the genesis of it. And
it's massive now.
It's
big. I've done a few of their
what year was
galas,
that?
So that was in 2000. And, you know, the idea was to use tennis, something that had been so good to us, as a hook to help kids develop literacy and life skill development. And, you know, now it's 5,000 kids a year.
That's amazing.
You know, they basically run all the park programming in the city of Boston. And, you know, if you go through the Tenacity programming starting in, you know, from as early as the 3rd grade through high school, you're going to graduate at a 97% rate, which in the city of Boston is astronomical. And these kids go on to be productive, you know, lifelong contributing citizens. So it's been a pretty special thing. Yeah.
Definitely is. Shifting a little bit to your coaching, you coach Eric a little bit?
A little bit. Yeah.
And then you coach the Lobsters. We came to a few of your matches there. Was that something that you kind of wanted to do, or kind of stayed away from? It was kind of just see how you felt, or?
You know, the coaching for me was always a double-edged sword. So the year after I retired, I coached Pam Shriver for a year.
I did not know that.
So she had this lifelong coach, Don Candy, and she had just decided it was time for a change, and I coached her that first year. and again, it was a double-edged sword because I had just come from that world and from that lifestyle. I was, coming into this responsibility of running Longwood, and so it was quite a balancing act. She had a great year. She made the finals of, back then it was the Virginia Slims, but she made the finals at the end of the year championship, which for her was unbelievable because she hadn't made the finals of a slam or something at that level since she was 16. And I just decided after that 1 year, it's just not, it's just, I want to be home. I was about to get married. I wanted to start a family, and travel around the world was no way to do that.
No.
So after that, Lendl called me and, said, hey, would you come, and when I'm home, would you come and help me? So I spent that next year going back and forth to Greenwich, which is where he lived, and worked with him. Never traveled with him. But again, he and I were pretty friendly from the tour.
That's awesome.
He knew that, I was a very hard worker. Yeah. Because it was the only way I could survive on tour because I didn't have the talent that the other guys had. And his sort of focus was, how do I win Wimbledon?
Yeah.
So, when he brought me on, he said,
finals before he won it.
He never won Wimbledon.
Or did he have 4 finals before he won his first Grand Slam?
The French, which
like
was his first, but he had lost in 4 finals.
Yes.
Or maybe the U.S. Open was his first. But anyways, he's like, okay, you're going to help me figure out serving and volleying. And I served and volleyed exclusively. So, in terms of, what are the instincts and how do I develop those instincts? And, Tony Roach was his primary coach. So what an education in terms of coaching, right? First of all, I'm working with the number 1 player in the world. Yeah. And secondly, I'm sort of, coordinating and getting marching orders in terms of working with Lendl from Tony Roach. Didn't get any better than that. Yeah. So that was year 2 after I had retired. And then it was quite a while before I jumped back in again.
Yeah. That's quite.
Yeah. It was a heck of an education. Yeah.
Right.
Heck of an education.
Lendl must have been a hard worker too, right?
He was a blast to work with.
Was he?
So, the amazing thing in the Lobsters, it was the same way. Like when we would have John Isner on the team and Martina Navratilova was on the team. One of the things that always amazed me was how open the top players were to what you had to say. They chose to bring you in for a specific reason. Yeah. And they were willing to commit. Yeah. And it's one of the things that I think people don't get to see from behind the scenes is that the top players, for the most part, are always open. Eyes and ears are open to learning. And, most of them are pretty good at discerning this is going to work for me, this isn't, and willing to have conversations. But I can't tell you how open-minded any of the top players that I've been exposed to or that I've worked with.
Well, the willingness to get information and then process it and see if it works for them or not. Right.
Right. It was so a lot of fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Yeah. Those were fun summers when the Lobsters were.
Yeah. We had John Isner here visiting the club and did a clinic with the members, and that sort of thing. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. So, what a great guy he is, too. He sat at the bar after and just chatted and wasn't trying to get out.
But another kid that came from a relatively normal life, wasn't supposed to be the next greatest thing. Yeah, right? He was just a normal kid, Yeah. Didn't grow up with the tag of next greatest.
Right. Yeah.
And Martina played. I don't know if she was ever here while playing for the Lobsters, but we had her on our team a lot, and again, just wonderfully open and willing to do whatever. Yeah. One of my favorite people on tour. She I brought my brother with me to the Australian Open one year.
You just did it.
And he clearly felt like a fish out of water because he wasn't part of the, traveling band of gypsies that was the tour.
Yeah.
And I got invited to this dinner that was going to be all the top players in the world and a couple of guys like me. And we walk into the dinner, and Martina, right out of the gate, sees my brother. Says, okay, he not someone who feels like he belongs here.
Right.
And she immediately goes over to him, starts talking to him, and just kept him by her side all night. Now, my brother happens to be a great conversationalist. And by the end of the night, they were sitting in a corner, giggling, laughing at jokes with each other. And to this day, when I see her, she doesn't say hello to me. She's like, "Hey, how's Glenn?" But forever, I just, she's someone who understood what it was like to feel like an outsider.
Yeah.
And she could spot someone who didn't feel like an insider.
Yep.
Right.
And her instincts were to comfort that person.
Yeah.
She's an amazing lady.
Yeah.
An amazing lady.
No, I'm good.
Sure.
All right.
You want ice or no ice?
No, perfect.
All right. We were talking about her in one of our podcasts, and she 68 Grand Slams.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's maybe 69. Right. Want to look that up? I think combined, mixed with regular.
Mixed doubles. I mean, as great as she was in singles, I would argue that she's the greatest women's doubles player ever.
Yeah.
I mean,
in that era.
Yeah.
But she's quite something.
Yeah.
And she changed, she
played with Shriver,
Shriver, right?
Yeah. She and Pam won.
They won. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys saw that Pam lost all of her trophies.
no.
So she lives in California.
Yeah.
Her house was in those fires.
The fires.
Her house didn't burn down, but she got all of her trophies and whatnot out of her house, put them in her son's car. They went to a hotel, and they got up the next morning, and the car was stolen with all of her trophies in it.
Oh, boy.
Right?
I did not see
Anyways,
that one. Yeah.
anyways, it became public, and somehow they found the car and they got all the trophies back.
wow.
But anyways, she's got a lot of slam trophies too. With her partnership with Martina.
Right.
How many?
Did she win? She didn't win any singles, did she?
Pam?
Slams? Yeah.
No, she made the finals of the U.S. Open at the age of 16.
16, yeah.
And then she made the finals of the end of the year championship that year that I was coaching.
How old was she when you were coaching her?
Like 27.
So into her career. Okay, so into her career.
Oh, more than 10 years after,
Yeah.
Yeah.
She had 18 singles, 31 doubles, and 10 mixed. So 59?
Yeah.
59?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not a bad career.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And she changed the game, too.
Yeah, of course.
Right? In terms of fitness.
Yep.
She completely changed the game. It had started to change on the men's side, but she ratcheted it up.
Yeah, she sure did. Nutrition, everything, every aspect of it.
Right.
She was checking out like Lendl. Lendl changed it in that same way.
Yeah.
People got fit because they saw what that guy was willing to do.
It is. He always said, I may not be the most talented guy, but I have the most talent for the hardest work.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. He did work hard, boy.
Yeah.
He worked hard. He had fun, though. Lendl was one of these guys that in public was, straight-faced, no emotion, pure check, right? And behind the scenes, I can't tell you how much fun he was.
Really?
Oh.
He was spoken to McEnroe too, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No one got along with Matt. But I was at his house one time, and Edberg would, whenever he was coming to the States, would call Lendl and say, hey, can I come stay at your house for a few days, practice, whatever. So I was there working with Lendl, and then Edberg shows up, and I'm like a kid in the candy store, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
So here's the number 1 player in the world, the number 2 player in the world, and we're on the practice court together, da-da-da. Well, Lendl was famous for, if we were going to practice from 2 to 4, we would hit the first ball when the second hand hit 2 o'clock. And we would end when the second hand hit 4 o'clock, right?
Done.
And
Yeah.
it was like, no pun intended, clockwork.
Yeah.
So, and Edberg knew it. And I had known Edberg since he was, 16 years old, right?
Yeah.
So the whole thing was really comfortable. And I'm the kid in the candy shop, right? So we're practicing one afternoon, and Lendl says, come on, we got to go. And Edberg and I are looking at him like, it's only 1:20. We're supposed to practice till 2. He goes, no, we got to go. So we go flying back to his house. And he lived in this estate with this, stone wall, 12 feet high all the way around. And outside were all of these really nice cars, Range Rovers and Mercedes and Porsches. We're like, what's going on? We come through the gate, and there are all these kids' bicycles, like, bikes that 13, 14-year-old kids would be. And he goes, come on. And he takes us into his basement, starts throwing us hockey gloves and hockey sticks, and he starts putting on like some goalie stuff. And it's like this the spring. It's like what's going on here? He goes, come on. We go outside, and there on his tennis court, the net's down, 2 hockey goals at either end of the tennis court, and there are all these guys and these kids playing street hockey.
On the tennis court?
On the tennis court. Well, it was all the Rangers that lived in the southern Connecticut area and the neighborhood kids. And so we go out, so Edberg and I go out there, and I'm looking around, I'm like, so we got the Rangers, we got Lendl, we got Edberg, and the neighborhood kids, right? And we played street hockey for maybe 3 hours. I can't tell you how much fun it was.
Sure.
And Edberg and I are looking at each other just laughing because he was a hockey fan, and it was just so much fun. And I turned to one of the kids at one point, and I said, this is absolutely incredible. And he looked at me like, what's wrong with you? We do this all the time.
That's awesome.
Oh God. So, but anyways, that's a story. Lendl was a lot of fun behind the scenes. And
it's amazing. That's not the picture.
He would let very, very few people in.
Yeah.
He would let very few people in. He was very.
But if you're in, you're in, right? Is that type of?
Yeah. So I still talk to him. When I have a good golf result, I'll call him and let him know.
That's right. We're gonna get into that too. Oh, because he loves it, right? It's all he does now, right?
He plays a lot of golf.
Yeah.
Where
do you see? How do you see the evolution of the tour, the tennis, into this day from 90s, 80s, 90s, all the way now? Do you? Because you stay connected a little bit, right? With you do some stuff with USTA now, right? Is that
I'm on the board of USTA New England now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we'll go that in a second. But you see that the tour now evolving to it's obviously new heights and endorsements and prize money and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what's your take on all of it?
Oh boy, how long do we have?
I know, right?
I'd start with the players.
Yeah. Let's start there.
I think every generation of player or participant in every sport gets bigger, stronger, faster, better training, better technique, better diet. I just think every generation is better than the past. So I always chuckle when there's the argument of, this generation was better than that. No, the current generation is the best, and the generation after that will be better than this generation.
Because you learn from it.
There's a natural evolution, and I'll tell you. So Elaine and I were at the Australian Open, not this past year, but the year before.
Yeah.
And we were there for the quarterfinals on. And if you took the last 8 men in the quarterfinals of the Australian, 24, the average height was like an eighth of an inch below 6'5".
Yeah.
6'5".
That's amazing.
That was the last 8, and they were all 6'5", 200 pounds, right? And I'm telling you, when I was playing, if you walked into the locker room at Wimbledon that had the top 100, top players in the world, if there were 5 or 6 guys my size, at the time, 6'3.5", 190 pounds, if there were 5 or 6 guys my size, it was a lot. And now it's average. It's just average. So they're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster. I mean, you see these guys move, and then you stand next to them, and it's like, oh my God, they're giants.
But you are the super athletic, and that's a tough combination.
Yeah.
So the physicality and
So I think between size, strength, technique, training, diet, all that, I think the game has never been in a better place.
Yeah.
And I think the level of tennis is unbelievable. And you throw in, how string technology has evolved.
That's another big
the racket technology. The rackets are pretty much the same I was using in terms of materials, and the physics behind the rackets haven't really changed. The string technology has changed so dramatically.
So you reckon that's a massive
the ability to put spin on the ball, has improved the game.
Yeah, you can see what that ball is doing these days.
Yeah.
Right?
So I just think it's amazing. My jaw's on the ground watching these guys play.
And what they do, how they change the geometry of the court too, right? That's
and I think with Alcaraz coming into the game and his willingness to come to the net, his willingness to use more of the court with, angles and drop shots, and
showed everyone how to beat Medvedev,
is making the game that much more interesting and fun to watch.
Yeah,
and dynamic, and better, right?
I think so, and he shows that joy of playing.
Yeah.
Right, you don't want to be just have a little fun out there.
Yeah,
don't forget about that, because it is becoming like there's so much money on the line. There's so much stuff on the line that you can see those guys being so. I thought about this funny thing the other day that I never once saw Federer looking in his box and doing this that he won a point. Right now, you see those guys doing all the time, and I wonder myself why. And it's because it's such a team behind every player that when he wins a point, he wins it with his team. Becomes I don't want to say a team sport, but it's like you share it with everybody there because it's so much that goes into it.
That's interesting, Roz, because for the longest time I thought it's a crutch, and that the players would be better off learning how to think for themselves.
I want to get into that too,
and not depend on having to look over at their box. And I think along with your line of thinking, I'm starting to change. I'm old, so I'm a little stuck in the old school way. But I am starting to think that it's a strength. Drawing on strength rather than it being a crutch. I think for some people it is still a crutch.
It is. Was it the last frontier? Was tennis the last sport where when you step on the playing field, you were by yourself? That was
coaching.
The last frontier.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. I mean, coaching's been going on for the last 50 years since coaches became a prominent thing.
Yeah.
So certainly before, or in my generation, where all the top players had coaches traveling with them all the time. Don't kid yourself. There was plenty of coaching going on.
Yeah.
But it's about time. It's above board. And it makes the game better.
It does.
Makes the game better. Makes it more interesting. Like, who is this? What are they saying? How? And then trying to correlate that to maybe a change in tactic, or
that's the
whether it's
thing, right?
Return position, or whatever.
You see him
it is.
chat. Should I go back? Should I stay in? Should I do that? That does change things.
I think that makes the game better, right?
Yeah, better
challenging.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Is what do you think about the stats that they try to bring in? Remember, they have those iPads, and right there's a fine line where you bring your stat and also you gotta work your gut as a coach there. How much you tell your charge there, because they are numbers, but don't tell the story,
No, I mean there's still the head and the heart are still a huge part of tennis.
Yeah.
Having said that, I've always felt more information is better.
Of course.
But the reality, just simply more information is not better. More information with the right information being used the right way, correctly, is better. It's still going to be, what are my strengths?
Yeah.
How can I maximize those? And what are my opponent's weaknesses? And how can I maximize my strengths to take advantage of my opponent's weaknesses? Strategy in tennis has been that since tennis began.
Yeah.
And strategy is as simple as that in today's world, right? And that will never change. Having a few more statistics to sort of make it a little more convincing and concrete for the player is great. Is great. But that's all strategy is, and then you apply tactics to achieve your strategy, right? But it's not that complicated.
Right.
Get out there and do
it. Give me the best strategy in the world, and I still can't, beat this guy who's way better than I am.
Thinking on such a short amount of time when they start pivoting on what they do, and you have to react in that split of a second, not even a split of a second.
Yeah.
See what the speed of those guys are playing.
Yeah.
I was watching a match, and I was watching an interview, and I talked about this before, that Cahill was talking about it. Agassi made this observation that when he watches Sinner, he's like, there used to be parts of the court that you were feeling safe when you hit a ball in. He's like, with him, there's no safe part of the court, and that's where we hit it. Yeah. That they can do stuff from everywhere, man. Yeah. And that's like, that's scary to be on the other side. Like, this guy can
pressure.
We're safe. No, there's no safe. You just got to deal with it. That's a.
So I used to use this this metric to help people understand when to be defensive, when to be neutral, and when to be offensive. And the basic concept was height of the ball and where you were in the court. Were you in the front of the court, at the baseline, 20 feet behind the baseline, right? So if the ball was above the net, that was a +1.
Yep.
Right? If the ball was at net height, that was 0. And if the ball was below the net, that was -1. And if you were at the net, that was +1. So, and if you were at the baseline, that was 0. And if you were well behind the baseline, that was -1. So if you just add the numbers together, it will give you a spectrum of anywheres from +2 to -2. +2 is as offensive as you can get, and -2 is as defensive as you can get, right? So
I like it.
It was a way to, after someone hit a shot, say, well, look, where were you? And what was your number? Well, I was a 0, right? Because I was at the baseline and the ball was net height, right? So it's hard to be back in the day. Now you can rip it, but that's a 0, so you probably should have hit a neutral shot, right? If I'm at the net and the ball's above the net, I should be +2. I should be trying to put that away, offensive, right? So it was a nice little metric to help people understand court positioning and for these guys today, everything. There's nothing. There's barely anything that's less than a +1, right? Right. Yeah. To your point.
Yeah.
It's just like the things they can do out of the corners and
not even the top 10. You can see a guy 15 over, like, how do you do that?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Which I think why, the advent of way more drop shots being put in play has really, really helped the entertainment value of the game versus two guys just beating the cover off the ball back and forth.
Right. Correct.
Right. Now all of a sudden you start to see some +1s, some 0s, some -1s.
Well, you see, they're creating a puzzle. They're creating a puzzle, and the other player has to kind of break that puzzle versus just this playing in this the
whole rhythm
pattern
of the point changes.
Because now hey, I asked the question here in a different realm,
and now I'm at the net, and I really don't feel that comfortable up here.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know what to do with the ball.
Right.
And my instincts aren't knowing where this ball's going to go.
Yeah. We do have some new explosive players. I watched that last week. I watched Fils and Alcaraz in Monte Carlo.
So good.
What a great match.
So good.
Man,
He's a big boy.
Oh,
too.
boy.
And to my point earlier, bigger, stronger. I mean, he's a middle linebacker.
Yeah.
Man, he is strong. And
Yeah.
does look 21, 20.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, dude.
Physical maturity of a
Yeah.
28 or
Oh,
30-year-old
boy,
is what he looks like. But he's 20.
Right.
What a
Strong kid.
battle that was.
So back to your original question, I think, the play is spectacular. The players are just better. In terms of where's the game going, I'm a little surprised it's taken this long for the players to come together and really push. And the push is, suing the slams for more prize money. I was privy to some behind the scenes stuff. Probably now it's 8, 9, 10 years ago when Eric Buderak was the president of
Player Council, right?
of the Player Council. And the players went to the slams behind the scenes and said, your revenue trajectory is straight up or pretty vertical, and our prize money is pretty flat. Yeah. And, we want more prize money. And, behind the scenes, they were making plans to have, a tournament out, as an example, a tournament out on Long Island the second week of the U.S. Open with the top 32 men in the world.
Wow, that was
if that was their leverage,
Right.
And eventually all the 4 slams agreed.
Discrepancy was high, right?
But 8, 9, 10 years later, the discrepancy is back where it was, where the revenue is going very vertical for the tournaments themselves, and not so much for the players.
Right.
And when you look at the percentage of prize money relative to revenue in tennis, it's minuscule relative to other sports.
It is.
Ryan,
can you
look at talked about that?
Can you look at the ATP rankings and see if you can give me like a prize money of 150 in the world?
Oh God!
But you're 150 in the world in anything else, like 150 in like football, basketball, hockey, baseball.
Yeah.
You're making a lot more money than 150 players in the world.
So I don't say this I just say this as a matter of perspective, not to sort of put a feather in my own hat, but 40 in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're an all-star. Yeah. You're an all-star. You're an all-league. You're an all-whatever in any other sport in the world. Right? We don't have that sort of nomenclature in tennis. So it when you look at their prize money, but it varies so widely depending on what country you're from.
Correct.
So, if you're if I was 40 in the world and I was from, some small country somewhere else in the world, it would have been way more valuable than being 40 in the world in America, where I was top 12.
Wait, well, let's shift a little bit to, because you are involved with USA, even New England. So American tennis now there's some good talent out there. It's been a lull for a while. Grand Slam, they're getting closer. What's your take on that?
We have to find a way to get the best athletes into the sport of tennis.
Right.
I think one of the great things about America is that we have these professional sports leagues. At least for me as a sports fan, it's great, right?
Of course.
But the reality is, I don't know about baseball as much anymore, but, football, basketball, some of the tennis has to compete with these other sports to get the best athletes.
Yes.
Whereas you go elsewhere in the world, and the best athletes are, for the most part, choosing between soccer and tennis.
Tennis, yeah.
So if I'm coming out of Switzerland, or if I'm, if I'm a Russian, if I'm, whatever, and I'm that good of an athlete, I'm looking at one or two sports, either or. So how do we get the best athletes into tennis? I've said forever, give me a starting point guard on an NBA team. I'll give you the number one player in the world. Given the right pathway, right, the right coaching and the right so on and so forth from a young age.
That's in. You think exposure is a big part of, like, as a young kid?
Totally.
You look for it, right? So they see the top 4 sports in the States, and you don't.
Yeah.
You don't get exposure.
Yeah.
That's.
I don't know. Have you guys read any of Malcolm Gladwell?
No, do tell.
So he's the guy that came up with the 10,000 hours concept. To be world class at something, it takes 10,000 hours. In that same book, which is the name of the book is Outliers.
Yeah.
He talks about Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and Larry Ellison.
Yeah.
3 of the wealthiest. The 3 great tech companies of our world. Their exposure to computers at a very young age are what differentiated them. And they were at the beginning of the computer, or they were at a point in the computer age where they were able to have exposure, and yet the evolution of computer technology wasn't such that innovation became harder. As a industry matures, innovation becomes harder, right? Yeah. And they were early on in the innovation sort of pathway of computers, where they came up with these ideas, so on and so forth. But all 3 of them had exposure to computer. They got their 10,000 hours
like then
at an early age, right? And so it's no surprise that they're all literally the same age. They're literally the same age.
Wow.
So how do we figure out who the best athletes are,
and then
without social engineering,
right?
And have them exposed to tennis? I mean, it's a fine pathway,
It is, and tennis is a fine motor skill too. So you need to develop the skills early. You cannot do it later. You cannot grab, or you can rarely grab. We talked about this before. You can rarely grab a 16-year-old like, hey, you're a good athlete, learn tennis. It's a little late. Right. You got to learn it when you're a kid.
Well, you have to have the fundamentals at a young age.
Exactly. Yeah.
You don't have to be solely a tennis
player.
No.
In
fact, I would advise against that.
Me too. I totally agree. Yeah.
But you have to have good fundamental development at a young age. Yeah. Yeah.
And that goes a little bit now going to our industry, which we have 2 club owners here. Are we doing the right thing there to try to teach those kids like those right fundamentals versus just playing? Because everybody's got to push. They got to do their own thing, because you got to get those kids going early, right? Because that's the move.
Yeah. And how do you make it fun for them?
Correct.
How do you inspire them to want more? I always laugh when a parent says, "How much tennis, should my kid be playing?"
Yep.
And my answer is always 1 less than what they want. Right?
Yeah.
Because parents are always, 5-10 times more than what they want,
Yeah.
But if it's always 1 less than what they want, they'll always want more.
Right.
Right.
So
good. So how do we do it? How do you create those fundamentals without giving them too much, making it fun, exposing them to other sports so they develop other athletic skills.
You need those.
Right.
It's so important.
It's a delicate pathway.
Yeah. I think tennis, though, has to, if you see it live, there's no better experience than going and watching.
Yeah.
And tennis reminds me a little bit of hockey. You watch it on TV and you go, yeah, it looks like that puck's moving. You see it live, and those guys are flying. You see how a tennis ball is being crushed by these pros live.
It's a whole different.
It's a whole different experience than watching it on television. How do you got to get these kids in the room. Right. You got to go and see some of this, and it's
right. It's worth 100 lessons.
Oh yeah,
right.
No question. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah,
totally.
I think I was 9 years old. My dad dragged me to Longwood, and I played a little. I was kind of half into it, and I watched Laver play Borg at the old Longwood on the clays, and I'm like, I like this.
Right.
Like that guy. I just saw what that ball did. It stretched out like an egg. There was so much topspin on Borg's on ground strokes. It's like, wow, this is cool. I got to figure out how to do this. And I can get 4 or 5 revolutions of spin on the ball now. Yeah, Laver and Borg.
Laver and Borg.
Very end of Laver's career.
Whoa, I would give my left arm to have seen that.
Yeah, I was just a little kid, and I remember leaving there going, wow, I didn't think that didn't look doable. But I saw guys do it, so let's go out and figure it out.
I want to do that too.
Yeah. But I had to see it live. If I had watched it on the old, what was his name there? Used to be on PBS channels or whatever, and you'd watch tennis and back in the Virginia Slims days, and you watch it on TV. There was, a little fuzzy ball. You could barely track it. Boy, you see it live, it's a whole nother thing. It's a whole nother thing.
100% agree. 100% agree. Which is why it's sort of a shame, the Lobsters is no longer around because it was a great way to be up close and personal, and it wasn't the greatest players in the game. But if you were a 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kid, and you saw what those guys were doing, to your point, and to see it, to be able to be that close, right?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, just the sound, even. You hear someone just hit a ball like that, where you're like, whoa.
Right. That's in the same like industry talk there. We talk about juniors, but the opposite thing happens with the adults. Tennis gets next to golf probably the most adults involved in, right? Because what else are you gonna do? So when you're like 35, 40, 45. And you have a massive influx of people like coming into our sports, which is good. And
it's a sport for life.
It is.
And
you are popular.
It's my dad calling back because I didn't take his first call. I'm sure. It'll be a whistle. There'll be a text in a minute and a half being like, "I've just called twice, just so you know."
That's a good thing, by the way.
No, I'm not. No, I'm just.
In the long run, it might not be right today, but in the long run, that's a good thing.
Oh, no, trust me. There'll be a little whistle text. I know the pattern. No, nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, so the adults, and it's such a good thing to see. Yeah. Right? Into our
and tennis is growing.
Oh, big time.
Tennis is growing. I think the hardest thing is finding good pros.
Well, let's get into that.
Oh boy, is that a challenge?
Right.
For when we were all growing up, if you were a good tennis player, you saw a career as being a teaching pro as a viable career.
Yeah.
I think fewer and fewer people do, and we got to figure out ways to make it a viable career, and B, make it an attractive, viable career.
Correct.
So there's some challenges.
There are. I also think I do see a bit of a shift in the mid-20s mind when they are looking to be a little bit more active. They are looking to do something that's more physical. That mirage of having a cushy job is not really that great. It's not for everyone. I shouldn't say that. It's not that great. It's not for everybody.
Going into an office every day. Geez, that really
correct.
Doesn't
especially if you
float my boat.
Right. Yeah. Especially if you're full of energy. You're in mid-20s. You want to what do I need to So
well,
I think that society might help with that.
We're all preaching to the converted.
Exactly. No dissent at this table.
Exactly. No need to do that. So you're involved in USTA. Are you looking to? I mean, I'm not sure how much you can talk or not talk about it, but look in developing the game. You look in the junior end. You look in the pros end.
So I think one of the reasons, or the primary reasons, I wanted to join the board were twofold. I think this issue around finding and developing real professional instructors, and the other is there was this overriding concern as we sit around the Boston metro area, we're losing indoor tennis clubs.
Yes.
And in Boston, we've lost 2 or 3 indoor facilities simply because the land values are so great that you really couldn't, or the owners or whoever they may be, couldn't justify keeping it as a tennis,
or you can blame them
tennis club. Right. And if we're going to continue to grow the game, in order for us to introduce people over the spring, summer, and fall, and then come back to the following spring and have them still want to play tennis, we need indoor facilities.
Yes.
So, if we introduce 10,000 people each year, but the overall yield of continuing tennis players is only a couple hundred because there's no way for them to play, or there's nowhere for them to play for 5 or 6 months. Now we're just spinning our wheels. Yeah. So, strategically, where does New England get the greatest benefit to have new facilities? How do we figure out a model or a formula for, new facilities? Everything from where's the money come from to who's managing a new facility, and how do we bring the various constituencies together to support it, whether it's a public entity, whether it's a private entity like a school or a university, whether it's a town or a city. How do we put that together to make sure that we've got enough indoor facilities around New England?
Yeah, that's the big challenge.
Yeah, we've lost several up here in the North Shore in the last few years too.
Right.
So it's tough. It's a tough problem.
Yeah,
and you have the outdoor clubs. They're like booming too, and then all that population, all that demographic is trying to come inside, but it's like you're restricted.
Yeah.
I wonder what the ratio is of like outdoor courts versus indoor courts in New England.
It explodes during the summer because there are just so many, public facilities, but there are also so many clubs that are just seasonal clubs.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And you was a pure tennis mind where you're at with pickle, paddle, padel.
Mm-hmm. So my wife Elaine loves pickleball.
Yeah.
Plays it all the time. And she comes from New England tennis royalty, the Power family, right?
Yep.
Her father was president of USTA New England.
Yep.
All 4 kids played Division I tennis. They were National Tennis Family of the Year. So she comes from a serious tennis background.
Yeah.
She loves it.
Yeah.
And I jokingly say, look, it's a fixed income sport. And so I'll play it when I'm 80.
Yeah.
Having said that, the game is brilliant. It's brilliant. The barrier to entry is so low.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can learn it in a half an hour.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to be that mobile.
Yep. You're right. It's easy.
Hand-eye coordination, because everything's just a block. You don't have to have superior hand-eye coordination. It's in terms of space used, so the barrier to entry in terms of creating facilities to accommodate it is much lower than, basketball or tennis or hockey or football or baseball.
Yeah.
Right. So the barrier to entry from a financial standpoint is really low. From a playing standpoint is really low. It's so much more, it's so social because it's 4 people in a much smaller space. I think I laugh because I think the game itself is absolutely brilliant. I'm not playing till I'm 80. and for the most part,
mobile or even have hand-eye coordination.
Yeah.
But is that a sport then? I feel like no.
Right. But
it does get people up. You can, like, tennis is hard if you can play at a certain level, and then real quickly you're joining with people that don't play at that level. Like, it's just really not going to be that fun. Well, it seems like that can cross very quickly. Everyone can be up and running. Grandparents can be playing with grandkids very quickly, and like everyone can meet somewhere where they're having a good time out there. Where like on a tennis court, that's really difficult to do.
Well, this is where it challenges people like you, Mike, and Rares and Kevin. Owning a club and managing programs and so on and so forth. It challenges us to engage people with adult red ball.
Yep.
How much different is that than pickleball?
Right.
Not much,
Yeah.
right? It challenges us to bring kids in and have them develop in a fun way around a small court, so on and so forth. Challenges us to find better ways to introduce people to tennis. I used to have I have this ongoing conversation with Bill Drake. I've always thought tennis was taught bass-ackwards, where people initially teach ground strokes. And my feeling forever has been, why don't we teach them the volley first? So you're up at the net. It's easier to get the ball over the net when you're closer to the net. Mm-hmm. There's less swing, right? So if I just have to hold a racket out in front of me, I'm going to be better at that than when I have to judge a ball that's coming from, a distance away and bouncing, and I'm taking a full swing. So why don't we teach the volley and then slowly but surely move people back and expand the swing? Because and the flip side is try teaching someone to volley once they've learned how to take a full swing, right? So
that's it. We're changing the clinics to volleys only, week 1 through 4. I like it.
Yeah. And so I think it challenges us in the tennis industry to start to look at things differently, to engage people in different ways
create different
excite them about the game of tennis.
Yeah. Hit a little bit more of the social aspect that pickle brings, and I look at it also as being like it kind of all falls in the same umbrella of racket sports, and it's almost like if you look at it right, it's a good addition to tennis too.
I would say this about watching lacrosse explode. If I've got a 10-year-old kid and I put them between a baseball game and a lacrosse game, they're going to choose lacrosse 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
Wait, you wear a helmet. They're running all the time. Yeah, right. The ball's flying all over the place. They've got a stick, and I can swing it at them, at the other kids. And baseball, like there's one kid throwing, one kid catching, and that's all that's going on.
Yeah, two kids playing catch.
You put 10-year-olds between those two games, and 9 out of 10 of them are going to pick lacrosse, right? So I've always thought, how do we use, potentially pickleball to, if a 10-year-old learns how to play pickleball and then sees someone on the court next to them playing tennis, running around, taking a full swing, the ball's flying all over the place. Yeah. I think 9 out of 10 of those, young kids, boys and girls, eventually are going to I want to run. Well, I want to take a full swing. I want to, So how do we co-opt pickleball to, grow tennis?
Well, I think tennis will be like the next higher challenge. You've done pickleball. You're like, okay, well, what's next thing? Well, it's tennis. Still play paddle?
I never played paddle. It's just so brutal on the hips.
Yeah, I remember me and Jay played.
Yeah, I would play socially.
Yeah. It's tough. It's tough on the knees, man.
Oh, I can't do it.
No, I stopped doing it because of that too.
Yeah.
This is a guy with a black eye. Stop doing it. It's brutal. So
brutal. I'm just gonna go get a. And the latest padel, right? That's the other extreme. That's you were saying that, Mike. You have to be so athletic to play it.
Yeah, it does.
Have you played it, Mike?
I have not. I've seen it played down in
two
Orlando
clubs now, right? In the Boston area.
Yeah.
But that's a small cohort of people.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's real niche.
Yes.
That's real niche.
That's almost like getting
again, the barrier to entry is so much higher, the cost and
the building the courts and everything else.
Right. How are you on time?
Perfect. It's awesome. So many different journeys for you. I even get a chance to talk about the Appalachian Trail that you have done. Remember that?
Stupidest thing I've ever done.
I remember we had that event here, and then we put the trail
up.
That's
the last time I saw him. It was right before that.
Yeah.
What did we have here? What was?
Yeah, we did a little fundraiser.
It was a fundraiser.
Yeah.
Because you did it as a fundraiser for Tenacity.
Right.
Yeah.
How long did that take you?
3.5 months. So, and I did it as a fundraiser for Tenacity.
Yeah.
That wasn't the genesis of the idea.
Yeah.
That came back in college when you could have these stupid ideas.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And it festered for, 35 years.
That was an amazing thing.
Yeah. You know what? I can now say I'm glad I did it. It took me 2 or 3 years afterwards to feel that way.
Really?
I don't think I've ever been as low as I was at different points doing it. Because you're hiking every day. You're at 1,000 calorie deficit a day, so you're hungry 100% of the time.
Ugh.
You can't stand your own smell. You are a walking stench.
Yeah.
It sounds fun.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're tired 100% of the
time.
Yeah.
So whenever someone says, hey, I'm thinking about hiking the Appalachian Trail, can you tell me about it? I'm like, here are 30 places between Georgia and Mount Katahdin in Maine that you should do a 2-day hike. And all the other stuff in between, don't do it. But you know what? I had created this romantic vision in my head of what it was going to be. And it was not.
It was not.
But we raised a lot of money for Tenacity, and now I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. How's your golf game? You picked that up, man. Not.
Yeah. Well, the OCD.
Yeah, you gotta remember you started doing it, and it's just like, where's Bud? He's golfing. He's golfing.
Yeah.
You're like.
Well, you know what? I was 50 when I started.
Yeah.
And very quickly I realized this is something I can do and be getting better at.
Yeah.
Tennis, I could still play at a level that was pretty high, but it hurt.
Yeah.
And, you know, I could play at a really high level, but my body couldn't cash the check. I'd be limping around for a couple of days.
Yeah.
It's fun getting better at stuff too. It's fun getting better at stuff too.
Well, that's the thing. I was 50 years old, and I was getting better at something, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly right, Kevin.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And, you know, my lovely wife, Elaine, laughs, and she's like, you really shouldn't play pickleball, because if you do, you're going to want to be really, really good. Right. And I don't think there's room for golf and for pickle.
Yeah.
So, you know, so I obsessed about it.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky, once again, had a couple people that were really exceptional golfers, real students of the game that sort of took me under their wing early on and helped me, and then just my natural competitive nature.
Yeah, you just get in there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I enjoy Hawaii when you go there.
Yeah.
You enjoy it? You play a bunch there?
Yeah, we play a lot of golf there.
Yeah.
And, you know, now Elaine's into it, and so we don't go anywhere without golf clubs. So, but it's just, you know, again, I always thought, you know, as you got older, those people in your world that are, you know, your best friends got smaller and smaller and smaller as you got older. And it's just the way life is, right? And with golf, I would say it exploded. You know,
that's nice.
I've got people in my life now that
that's amazing.
In a pinch, I know I could call that never existed before I started playing golf. So, you know, I think that's sports, right?
Yeah.
That's sports, but it just so happens you can do this later in life and get that joy out of it. Yeah, but I love the competitive thing.
Yeah, you gotta have it a little bit, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What's your perspective now? Like everything you achieved, are you happy with it?
Yeah, it takes time
right?
to appreciate it. You know, I can remember when I left the tour feeling like, oh God, I just didn't. You know, if I had only, you know.
Right.
Yeah. Now I look back
and
like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
you knucklehead. You know,
right.
I mean, you played tennis at Bates College.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So I appreciate it more. I think, like with everything, you know, as you get older, you have more perspective and appreciate things more. But there are a few things I wouldn't change anything, but there are a few things where I would have done more things. You know,
that's interesting.
Or I would have tried something. As well, you know, everything from changing my forehand grip to you know, going and playing some tournament in a city that I didn't get a chance to go play.
To see, right?
You know, I don't know, lots of things, right?
We all have them.
Lots of things.
Yeah.
Bud, it was a pleasure. Thanks for coming.
Wait, just before we go.
Yes.
I got to tell a Bud story.
Yes.
It's actually more of a lack of personal awareness story than a Bud story, but Bud might not remember the first part of this story, but way back, there was a guy named Reese Thomas that was a pro at, Dedham Country in Polo. And he
remember and know Reese. Yep.
Yep. And you played in a pro-am there against me and a guy named Henry Ganay, an Aussie. And it was just one of those hit and giggle things, members around. It wasn't, you know, real high end trying to, you know, just get balls and play, move it around. And at one point, I thought I had you lulled to sleep enough, and thought, I'm going to flatten out this ball right down the tee. I'm going to buzz it right by him, and I'll have something I can brag about later. Well, you weren't having it, because I hit that serve as good as I could hit it, and it came back and broke my ankles. And I'm like, all right, so Bud's not going to put up with that crap. Fast forward 15 years later, you and I are playing a pro or an exo rather against you and Jay Ronan here at the club. And at one point, I thought, I got Bud this time, and I'm going to take my lefty serve and I'm going to bend him right onto the next court. And you love that backhand return. You stepped out and brought that.
Move,
oh, I know. Yeah. Well, you hit it so fast by me that I hurt my neck, and I still feel it when it's raining. Absolutely no awareness of what I was up against, but I was convinced both times I had you, and son of a gun, I sure didn't.
We'll try again in 5 years, Mike.
Yeah. Well, I'll try something stupid, and then we'll come out with the same result. But yeah, that was those were fun occasions. I don't know if you remember that one. Way back in the day.
I remember both of them.
Is that right?
Honestly,
Yeah.
I remember both
that.
of them.
That was a great event that we had here at the club with you
really
and Jay.
Yeah,
that was a lot of fun.
That was
great.
great.
Back when we could both move a little better, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. The years have clicked on.
Yeah.
So,
well,
thank you, Bud. We appreciate it.
Oh,
Thank
Mike,
you. This is great. Let's
that
do
was
it
really
again.
Fun to reminisce.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's
great to have
Thanks,
you.
guys.
That was fun.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it, Kevin.
Yeah.
Great.